Hello and welcome to the latest belter of an episode of the Scot Goes Popcast. My name is James Kelly, and as many of you know, since 2017, I've written every month for a pro-independence magazine called iScot. It's a beautiful magazine. Every issue is a collector's item. The front cover is always gorgeous, and it's packed with interesting content. And I'm delighted to say that my guest today is the editor of iScot, Ken McDonald. How are you, Ken?
I'm great. Good morning to you. Thank you for having me.
Right, so iScot started just a few weeks after the independence referendum in 2014. Could you tell us a bit about the original idea behind it and how you got it off the ground?
Yes. 2014, there was a lot of obviously online activity and on TV. And I was home one night watching some political broadcast with Jim Murphy involved. And my wife said to me, or shouted at me, "Do you realise you're shouting at the television?" he can't hear you. The street can hear you. And this led to a freezing of the picture on Sky. And my wife saying, "You know what, I would love to learn more about the independence movement and what it's all about, and generally stuff that I can't find anywhere else." But I noticed that when you are engaged in any TV program, you're watching 24/7, 365 politics, which I have a life and therefore I don't. Everybody's combative, it's pugilistic, they're pointing, jabbing fingers, they're hurling abuse at each other. There's very little in the way of clear debate. And therefore, the card that I've got, which was the voting card for the referendum, probably carries the same weight. Well, it does carry the same weight as yours.
Yeah.
For all your knowledge and background history and everything else. So why should I vote yes when I've got no idea, and it's highly unlikely that I will have any clear idea because it's just so aggressive. So unless you can change your attitude and your tone, I'm not going to vote because it's pointless. I don't know what I'm voting for. And that really was the inspiration to try and create a vehicle that was able to, as I hoped, create some kind of information that soft yeses, soft no's, generally those that have an interest can get it without feeling as if they've got broken glass being thrown at them all the time, safely and easily to access. And there are some people that just have absolutely no interest in politics. So there are articles in there that are all positive about Scotland and don't directly refer to politics per se, but it builds up that narrative that we are a particularly strong, creative, vibrant, wonderful country that deserves, an alternative view to this constant "we are, too wee, too poor, too stupid" narrative.
Yeah.
And hopefully that is working.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, people who haven't seen iScot, who have heard about it, haven't actually looked at an issue, might be quite surprised. It's probably, at the moment, it's probably only a minority of articles are directly political or to do with independence.
It's like less than 15%, I think, of the overall content. I mean, the other reason I was going to say to you, which is that of the 1.4 plus million people that voted for independence, which didn't get us across the line, and there's only 300,000, as you know, of a difference that's prevented us from getting there. Less than 60,000, I believe, was the membership of the SNP, the only political party that was really pushing independence out of that 1.4 million votes. So a lot of people are not particularly interested in the ins and outs of the SNP party or individuals or personalities in there. They just like to know more about independence per se. And that's the kind of audience that we target. We're not particularly keen in convincing those and political parties or personalities or politicians. It's more about the reasons why Scotland should be independent and how it affects you, the reader, and the reader's family and grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren going forward. And we do it in a gentle way, and we do it in a way it's a long read that allows people to pick up and decide whether that's something that sows a seed in them that either grows or dies. We have a few people who are unionists that read it, that enjoy it just for the articles that are in there, that would never vote for independence, but they like the magazine for the quality of articles that it displays. But we would like to put the case for independence across that in a reasonable fashion anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say that because it is such a sort of general magazine with so many aspects of Scottishness, it's like a sort of love letter to Scotland in a way. It's the sort of magazine I would imagine that would appeal to the Scottish diaspora in the United States, in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, people who are very proud of having Scottish heritage and want to stay in touch with that. Do you have a lot of subscribers from those countries?
We do, is particularly in digital, although we have a fair few on print, which is rather an expensive medium now to Canada and to Australia, a few in Europe. And we have those that weren't aware of it. Well, just to mention one article we had in a recent issue, that the gentleman in Aberdeen who invented the electric car way back in 1840s, which was something I didn't know either, courtesy of the famous Grouse Peter, who's right into automotives. Again, nothing to do with politics, but purely and simply about the ingenuity and inventiveness of Scots way back 200 years ago. Who are, we're talking now about Cambo and all these other oil fields, that we did think about electric vehicles way back in the 1840s, and nobody generally gets to know about it, because unless it comes from a London lens, you never tend to hear about anything that works in Scotland. We do our bit for the country and for just people that should know about what we have done in the past.
So in terms of people, iScot contributing to, pro-independence cause, you were talking about people maybe picking up a copy. I remember back when you started, I believe I'm right in saying that the magazine was available in quite a lot of shops.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, and from my point of view, I would imagine that makes it easier for people to make an impulse buy. Sort of casual people who might not be very interested in politics, they might just sort of see the cover and think, "Oh, what fancy buying that," and so that might have helped to get the magazine out to people who wouldn't be interested in politics normally. Do you think there's a slight problem now that it's subscription based, that you're preaching to the converted more than you were before?
Well, not really, because we generate more sales through word of mouth. That people really refer them on to friends and family, which is one of the best referrals you can receive. But initially, when we started, and we started in the back of, I was made redundant not long before the referendum. We started on a redundancy money and our private pension, or my private pension, to get the magazine up and running, because I believed at the time, following back to what my wife had said about trying to learn more, that there would have been lots of people like her that were genuinely interested in finding more about the independence cause. So I invested in it, thinking that we could make this happen. Our distribution model was through an organisation called John Mingus, and they in turn shipped to most, if not all, newsagents within Scotland. But the bad news was that they take 50% of the cut of the sales. So that in itself wasn't a particularly great business model for us. And they only take 50% cut of the sales if they sell the product. A lot of instances we have, the magazine would be returned. When you can imagine your newsagents, it's a cacophony of colour on the wall. And all these things are all jazz hand colours and buzzes to attract the attention of the eye. But they're competing with so many folk that we found that although we were selling quite a few through the distributors, it was costing us money.
Yeah,
frankly. And all the stuff that we got back, we still are a bit environmentally minded. We thought it was a waste, and therefore just purely and simply said, let's do it by order and sell at all of the one banner events or any events that we can get to promote it. And it seems to be working okay. I mean, we're not doing, the 100,000s a month, but I would just caution readers that buy magazines from newsagents that a good 50 to 60% of the publications, and include newspapers in this, go back to be repulped, because they have to print enough for fear that somebody else's magazine or somebody else's paper will be taken. And a lot of this stuff goes unread and is a real waste of energy. And I think, to be honest, we don't do that, and therefore we kind of fit into the wonderful banding of niche markets, I would say. Hopefully it will change within the next year or two.
All right. So you think you might change that model in the future then?
The past 2 years have been really difficult for all publishers, particularly because you can't get out.
Yeah.
We can't go, we can't stand in the street corners to sell. It was seeing light at the end of the tunnel, then suddenly it changed back again with new variants. the whole ability to go and meet people has caused a lot of grief between selling stuff, and we just have to do it on Twitter and Facebook, and that in itself was just a difficult gig. Similarly, there are no events. You find that conferences tend to be few and far between, so therefore our outlets for promoting the cause has been limited, and frankly with furlough and a variety of other pips been reduced by 20 quid, there's a lot of people that find that magazines are just luxury items, and we are up against it the same as anybody else that are trying to compete with the same smaller financial resource that people have for disposable income.
So, I mean, in terms of the divisions in the independence movement, I mean, we used to be a fairly united movement, but recently, obviously, you know, Alapa has appeared, and even before that, of course, there were divisions between the SNP and the Greens, and but certainly very few divisions between the SNP and the Greens now. But is it difficult to have a magazine that appeals to the entire movement? I mean, is that becoming impossible now, because no matter what you say, you're going to offend somebody?
Yeah, but I mean, the general narrative that we operate under is independence above political parties, above politicians, and above personalities. So we are for indie, and like our colleagues at Independence Live, anybody within the indie movement that's trying to progress the cause of independence will get our attention and support. We're finding now that there is a polarisation. We had a front cover that you may recall called Max the Yes, because we saw as an opportunity. And this front cover didn't have a direct story attached to it, purely and simply we're just saying that we need to make an impact on the independence cause, and this upcoming election would do that. We understood at the time, between the Alapa's point of view, Alapa 2, SNP 1 was a great idea for getting a maximised independence platform within Holyrood. But the SNP's change of heart to SNP 1, SNP 2, whilst didn't make any sense, I could understand that, okay, that's right. That very quickly ended up having a polarisation effect. And we had a few good people came on saying that Max the Yes was something that Alex Salmond would say, and they went on about Alex Salmond. We said, this has nothing to do with Alex Salmond. It's nothing to do with Alapa. It's all about independence. And if you're going to relegate independence to, number 4 on the list, we're never going to get anywhere. We have to keep independence front and centre, which we always try and do. Now, we will support Alapa. We had adverts for SNP, Alapa, ISP. We've had articles from even Tories and Labour people who are quite sympathetic to the cause. So we tend to follow the independence front and centre, and it's getting less and less. It's getting more and more marginalised now to political parties, which I don't know whether why the reason that is, but the sooner the better we work on independence front and centre, I think the better it will be for everybody.
I suppose, just to play devil's advocate for a minute, I suppose the point the SNP would make is that, and I'm not a member of the SNP, so I am just playing devil's advocate. The point they would make is that the phrase Max the Yes, as far as I can remember, that originated from the Action for Independence Party. Was, obviously trying to argue that you should not give the SNP your list vote. And I suppose some people would say if you put Max the Yes on the front page, that's a kind of declaration of you're opposed to the SNPs on the list.
Every day at school day, James, because I didn't know that was a connection to it. Okay. It was just clear and simple when you've got an A4 portrait page and you've got a limited amount to get the fonts big. Max, the 3 words was was the only reason behind it. There was no hidden connotations, but purely people will see hidden connotations and things that we didn't really know. I mean, we had, for example, gone back 3 years ago, we're still receiving credit for that, a front cover that depicted the 3 graces.
I remember that, I
remember that very well. That cost us dearly from lots of feminists that assumed that we were body shaming when the artist, the way back, a 15th century painter, in turn only used male models for his models and painted on ladies' faces. There was angles taken from our front covers that we didn't even contemplate in a million years. This was just purely and simply saying you have three politicians that happen to be female, that happen to be powerful, and they're letting the country down. And everybody else in their dog so is something entirely different. And that's something we're quite cautious on. But again, being an independent magazine and trying to run on without fear or favour, we're always going to come up against that kind of thing. But no, we are truly independent minded. We want independence to happen. We don't give a damn what the taxi or bus is that gets us there, as long as everybody votes for indie. And we are supportive of any organisation that's trying to get there as well.
I think the National have run into that sort of problem as well, because they obviously try and get noticed with really eye-catching front pages, and they're sometimes accused of, coming across as a comic or whatever. So you can't really win. You either sort of be very bland or you get hammered for it.
Yeah, and the thing is, with the National, and with respect to my colleagues in the paper industry, I mean, they're a profit and loss centre for a multinational corporation. So these guys are under pressure to get numbers to sell. Our argument is that whilst we are under pressure to sell, but we're predominantly there for the cause. So there is no board of directors, there is no profit margins that we've got to operate. As long as we can clear our nose and get the message across, we're quite happy about it. But the guys have exactly the same pressure of trying to keep people on board that would otherwise buy somebody else's publication. We think we're kind of unique, that I don't know of any other independent publication. I mean, I know the SNP have their own in-house magazine, but other than that, we are pretty much on our own, and we hope that following today's discussion that we're having, that more people will at least check us out, if not digitally, but certainly write to us, DM us, and we'll happily send you a copy free of charge just to read. So we have so much faith in the product that we have that we will do that.
Well, this is a good opportunity to do the free advert bit. So, so there are two ways you can buy iScot. There's the digital version and there's the print version.
We have the digital and the print, yeah.
And I think the print, you can't buy print issues individually, from what I recall. You have
we have half a dozen or so stores, which are just stores that we've had traditionally way back several years ago. We're 7 years old in St Andrews Day, and we had a guy in Byers Road, Barrett's in Byers Road, that we've always had since. They're just legacy sales that wanted to deal directly with us. We've got a few others dotted about the place, but basically the best way to do it is to buy it directly from us. That way we know that whatever we print, we know we're going to sell with little in the way of waste. We've got environmentally friendly disposable bags that compostable bags that can be thrown in with the vegetables. The inks, the paper, everything is managed from source. We pay a premium for it, but we have a quality product at the end of the day that we think, for the price of $3.99, which is exactly the same price since you did your first article way back 7 years ago. It hasn't changed, and it's difficult for us to change now given the pressure and everybody's incomes. But I think the best thing to do is check us out and see what we offer. One point I was going to say to you before, I don't know if you were going to ask it, was the demographic of the people who buy it are more or less the same demographic of those people that voted no in 2014, which is the 55 plus. I mean, there are people younger that buy it, but it's those folks that have been brought up with the tactile feel of print and paper. My grandchildren today rarely touch anything that's printed. I mean, we do buy them books, but everything's on a tablet or on a phone. And that just seems to be quite common nowadays, that digital seems to be taking over print. But like cinema and television, there will always be a niche market for print. And we think that we're still going to be here in the next 7 years, next 10 years.
Do you think it's a bright future for iScot? Do you think it really will carry on for years and years and years to come?
I believe that quality sells. I mean, we're going through a tough time, as every organisation is, because of lack of advertising, and we've taken a hit in subscriptions for a variety of reasons. But 7 years is a good sign. It augurs well. We were told that, generally speaking, most new publications rarely last beyond the third issue. So we've done it, mainly because of the fact that people like yourselves don't take payment for what we're doing, which is a great thing. But we are we are planning to be here. Really, we are beyond health conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. But you do run fundraisers, so I presume that means that the actual subscriptions don't fully cover the cost of the magazines. Is there a kind of challenge there to make the publication sustainable going forward?
Well, the thing is, we started off with my own private resource to make it happen, but in any enterprise, like any other small business, you have to set up and have, fund the subscription software, the production software, the computer systems, the broadband connections, all these things, plus the print and then the postage and the packaging and all these things. That has to be funded up front before you've sold anything. On the first issue, we had 10,000 copies downloaded because the first issue went out in digital, then went on to print. And we asked the readership that these are free. If you like the idea of an iScot publication going forward, please subscribe. And we started off at a relatively low annual price to encourage people. We had 80 people out of 10,000 pick it up. And one of the things we learned then was that generally people only pay for stuff if they absolutely have to.
Yeah.
People like yourself who offer free blogs and have to ask now and again for support to fund your polls and things. That's becoming the norm. As we know, the gentleman, your other colleague that's given up, was generating something in the region of nearly £200,000 a year, which is phenomenal for somebody that only needs a modem and a keyboard. We are quite highly expensed in the equipment and the printing and all these other. So we have to occasionally, when we have months where we haven't taken in many subscriptions, still need to pay the same amount of money every month. And that's why we have to ask for support.
Are you running a fundraiser at the moment?
We've been running it since 2019 and we're at 52%.
Okay.
52%. But one of the things I was going to say is that whereas we have some colleagues, bloggers, and no disrespect to them, arguing about, say, certain MPs or certain MSPs. To us, that doesn't really matter. We'd rather focus on, the 1.4 million people who voted yes, who are soft yeses, and even to a certain extent soft no's now, that voted no way back 2014, but they may consider the idea if there's a reasoned argument that they can see and read. There are no reasoned arguments that are put out. I think the Wee Blue Book was probably the culmination of information dissemination to the general public, but most of them were snapped up by yes voters or people close to yes. And I know that I think Wings had planned to do 1 million items, although I think the National followed that up by doing 1 million drops to via the SNP organisation. There are loads of people yet to be convinced that we should be focusing on and not having this interscene arguments about SNP or Alipar or any of that other nonsense, which just really, as I was going to have on a front cover for the next issue, a dog chasing its tail. Let's sniff out the route to independence rather than start this infighting. It's just a waste of time, effort and energy. And frankly, it's pissing off a lot of folk, excuse the language, who are interested to progress things, but I'm just getting sick and tired of the internal arguments between what she's doing or what she's not doing, or what he's doing or he's not doing, or all this kind of stuff,
Well, so I suppose speaking as somebody who is involved in these internal arguments, I suppose the argument from the Alipar point of view is that if you believe, as we believe, that the SNP are not serious, or the SNP leadership, I should say, plenty of people in the SNP are serious about a referendum, but the SNP leadership are not, and the only way you can actually make progress towards independence is by changing that equation and by sort of changing the dynamic.
Yeah, I can understand that and realise that. In fairness, I was a member of the SNP, and I'm no longer a member of the SNP. We had an interview arranged with Peter Murrell. This is about 3 years ago, and Robbie Dunwoody, who was the lead article within the publication, then had a meeting set up and they refused point blank after a period of time trying to sort out the face-to-face, and we were asked with a list of questions. So when we said that we really don't send in a list of questions, we'd rather, as we're doing here, have one-to-one, and things that come up, we can ask the question and put it to print. I mean, we're positive for independence. It wasn't going to be a hatchet job, but we're not looking for an angle to trip anybody up or to embarrass them or whatever. But we found it very difficult that we couldn't even speak to Peter. I mean, we know him and Robbie knows him, but we were going through a couple of very young spads who were acting as gatekeepers, saying that you can't get an interview unless you fill out this kind of list of questions that you want to ask, and we'll tell you whether we answer them or not. Since then, we've never had any opportunity to speak to the SNP. There's never been any dialogue. I think they're quite happy dealing directly with the national and other organisations, and we're cool with that. I mean, we promote them. We are friends in the SNP. We're happy to carry articles from them as and when they're ready to do so, provided it's positive about independence. And we will do so for any other party.
A lot of people would be quite concerned about what you said, because I would imagine the SNP do not impose those sort of conditions on, even publications that are very hostile to independence, like the Telegraph. So it's almost like they're holding it's almost like they're more hostile to pro-independence media than to anti-independence media, which is quite odd. And certainly bloggers. I mean, my contact with people in the SNP over the years, even when I was a member of the SNP, was not non-existent, but it was limited. They do sort of keep you at arm's length very much.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't have any problem with the individuals that we have. I mean, we've got an open, we apply, well, the editorial line is pretty much, as I said, independence above everything else and without fear or favour. So we don't feel obliged to write positive stories because we have to be pals with somebody, as you and I know from, or I know to my experience from upsetting Stuart Campbell from Wings Over Scotland for an article that he just didn't like. And today, I mean, you can either become a publication that's affiliated to your preferred party, which we don't. I mean, we will carry articles from Alipar, ISP, or anybody, even adverts, absolutely no problem. But what we won't do is be the voice of these guys if they have a particular view to punt, if it doesn't marry in with what we're trying to do, which is independence first and centre. So I've already had discussions with Alex Salmond and Tasmina about how we're happy to carry articles. And we already have some members of Alipar that write for us, but that's not the reason why they write for us. They've written for us because previously they've been members of SNP, and even then it didn't matter because we had guys who were Labour members who were unionists who wrote for us, and we've had threats of people threatening to cancel because they were unionists. They don't realise what this guy said in 2014. They write articles, and the articles are fair and reasonable and well written. And for that reason alone, they're allowed a voice within the publication. So it's not as if we're going to cherry pick individuals that's going to represent a political party. Therein disaster lies. We'd much rather promote independence. And if you're going to be part of that team to make it happen, fine. If you want to write articles specifically, trying to thwart or kill or sustain the argument for independence, probably not a home for us, because, I'd rather it was all pretty positive, upbeat, and there's an argument to a logic to it. Doesn't mean to say that we don't allow a critical, constructive criticism about certain things, but as long as there's a reasoned argument behind it, we're happy to print
it. Your iScot occupies a very special, unique place in the new media, because you are actually print, and you're high quality print publication. Obviously, the new media is very extensive. But it's going through a bit of a difficult period at the moment because one or two people have stopped. A few people are maybe not stopped completely, but they're kind of seem to have lost interest a little bit. They've lost their enthusiasm. A lot of people just saying independence isn't going to happen, so I'm not going to buy, which I don't agree with. I mean, if you believe in independence, then make it happen. That's my attitude. But what's your verdict on the current state of the new media? Because possibly it's at its weakest point since 2014 at the moment.
Yes, it is. I mean, we've had people come and go. We've had an explosion of bloggers. Mm. There are good bloggers, there are bad bloggers, there are people who just dabble in it, and there are people that would like to make money from it. There are those that do very well, there are those that don't, and there are interesting voices and the rest of it. But the good thing about that is that you don't have to listen to anybody. You're not compelled or forced to pay for an individual's opinion as you are for BBC News.
Yeah.
And therefore, we as a magazine, which is a paid for subscription thing, whilst we try and offer, for those that are not too sure whether it's for them, we would give them it free and say, look, you have nothing to lose other than your time by trying it out. We're a paid for subscription because we have to. We can't do this on our own, off our own bat. You're doing your stuff off your own bat, which is a very expensive living. People just seem to think that all you've got is a keyboard and the rest of it is true, but you've got your time. If you're doing that, you're not doing anything else productive that's going to generate the income to keep the lights going and the electricity and the computer plugged in. So it's tough. But then again, the messages that we have got for the magazine is all about Scotland. We give a positive aspect of it. So we're giving information that people generally don't know. And a lot of the articles that we have, and then there's the usual give the people what they want as positive stories about where we are in the political scene. But there are some people who have just given up, specifically because of the fact that they cannot see any possibility of anything happening. And when you say, show me your argument, the argument is, well, what have we done since 2014? And the message is clearly nothing. There are no people working on it. There is nothing being done. We're not having any events. When we do have the occasional march, which is organised by another, people criticise it because it's not the right thing to do. It's almost as if just switch off all the lights, lock up the factory, we'll come back in 10 years' time when we're ready, which is nonsense. The Unionists haven't stopped fighting since 1707. And the notion that we can suddenly park independence, like the car park they had at the south coast of England with all these lorries and we'll get to it eventually, is just nonsense. The fight continues and we have to keep fighting, because all you're going to do is just cause this cancer in the independence movement that makes people to fall away, to focus on something entirely different, or to just lower the spirit of the nation. And currently that's what's happening, I believe, is that people are just getting sick and tired and fed up, and possibly the reason why you've got all these other parties that have come into the fray, because they want to pick up that chalice and run with it.
I think from the SNP's point of view, I mean, what you've described as what they are doing would, make people fall away from the movement. And probably from the SNP's leadership's point of view, that's actually a good thing, because they regard large parts of the movement as an embarrassment. And they just, before ALIPA was created, there was a lot of lecturing of the movement. You can't behave like this, you can't say that, you've got to learn to behave, you've got to learn to behave like decent people like we are. It's this kind of an elite-led approach, whether that's intended to actually win independence or whether it's intended to sustain the SNP in power. It's not they're not happy with the movement. They would rather remake the movement or just do it by themselves, basically, I think.
I mean, the franchise for independence, it belongs to everybody. It doesn't belong to one organisation. And to reiterate what I said earlier on, was out the 1.4 million, less than 60,000 were members of the SNP. So they are a very small minority. And some of the the non-public discussions they've had with other bloggers, I'm not talking to you, saying, why are you having this kind of debate with this guy? Because you're wasting your time. Nobody, I mean, okay, you might win a personal battle, but of 10 people within, say, a political party, it's a very, 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 very small, minuscule portion of the 1.4 million that we need to get as a across the line. And we're still 300k short. So focus on them, because these are the people that we need to keep, keep them going, keep them moving. Once apathy sets in, which probably answers your last question, which has it set in? Yeah, it has. To a lot of folk, they've just given up. They've cancelled subscriptions to all papers. They don't donate to folk anymore. Indie Live struggles, Linda at Broadcast Scotland, exactly the same thing. They're all trying to do their own job, but it's like planting a seed for an apple tree. Nothing's going to happen until we're mature down the line and we've established that we have got a media of our own, which we don't yet.
Well, or even if there was an independent referendum announced tomorrow, you would see the landscape change immediately, because
people will get more motivated, but the fact is, if nothing's happening, what's the point? It's just I'm not going to plan for it.
Well, you mentioned Independence Live there, and that's one part of the new media that is going from strength to strength, because, you know, back a few years ago, the criticism of Independence Live was they put out a lot of content, but, you know, it couldn't really stand comparison with the traditional media because of the production values. But now that's changed completely, and it's really impressive what they're doing.
Technology and bandwidth of broadband has enabled these things to happen. I mean, we can't compete against the BBC because they've got a market that dictates that they're guaranteed their money at the end of the month. I mean, if we were guaranteed money at the end of the month, that'd be great. We don't. We live in, you know, from hand to mouth. A lot of the times, some months we're better than others, but other than that, that's just the nature of the beast. And we are no different from any other company or organisation. We're just not part of a corporate organisation that's sitting there with £300 or £400 million behind them. We don't. So we really are truly grassroots, and it's all the more reason why it's great when we actually achieve things, like obviously winning the award, as you remember, 5 years ago from the best digital magazine in Britain. So the point I was going to say to you was that things change. Spending your money now is not a waste of $5.99 in a magazine, because compared to where we were 7 years ago, we've brought on people like yourself. We've tried to raise the profile of a lot of people who were just total unknowns. And there are those that have, you know, an argument to tell and wonderful stories to convey. And it's all part and parcel of creating that ecosystem of creative individuals such as yourself that get a wider audience to those who don't access you on the Gogglebox, but they do access you on print, because the demographic that voted no predominantly get their news from print. And it's still important whether people think it's not. And if they don't think it's important, then tell them to justify why the vow had such an impact, because that was done on paper.
Yeah.
The paper brought it out, and we're still talking about newspapers having an important thing even down south. Print is very, very important, and it will be with us for a while. Even though most people access their phones or their iPads or their computer systems, print will be with us. And if there's even 300,000 people that decide to vote yes instead of no, that gets us across the line. And that's what we're keen to do.
Well, I'll come back to Independence Live in a moment, but just talking about the importance of print. So that would point to the importance of the National, the vital importance of the National. And we were all extremely excited when it was announced that the National was going to be established, because that was obviously a big drawback in the independence referendum, that there wasn't, apart from the Sunday Herald, there were no pro-independence papers at all. And I mean, it's slightly disappointing that we know that half the population of Scotland support independence, but the National is not one of the leading papers in the country. What do you think is happening there? Why are people not embracing the National?
Oh God, there's a variety of reasons. There is, and I'm not specifically talking about the National. I'm just talking about products. What people always sell. It's why you get guys at Rolls Royce and you know, Rolex and stuff don't have problems during recessions. People always buy quality where there's a perceived value that they know they're getting. That's going to retain value. Then you have the situation of, and I'm diplomatically picking my words here, profit and loss centres. Okay, opportunity. The opportunity that we have a tangible market that isn't being serviced, and if we print something that services them, we should be able to pick up 50% of the market. So as the business plan goes, it's a relatively sound argument. Possibly they're up against, I don't know, cost reasons. I know that they were struggling a way back. They have gone wonderfully well from 5,500 when we saw their first publishing numbers up to about 12,000 now, but it's still relatively low. Their audience may well not be the 55 plus, may well be the 55 plus that are buying the print. There may well be people who are interested in finding out about independence, but just use it on the digital. And I think digital is a big part of the subscriber base. I reckon they're probably younger, but the common complaint we hear is there's not enough meat in it. I know they started doing their own magazine, and that gave up after about a year. but you really have to find the right material, and they do a good job. I'll give them their due. I mean, they're a tough gig that they've got, but they also are under a lot of pressure to generate numbers. We don't have that pressure.
I think one thing that always occurs to me about the National is that in an ideal world, you would probably have 2 pro-independence. Well, obviously, in an ideal world, you'd have 20 pro-independence newspapers, but you'd have at least 2, and you'd have a quality, like what you used to call a broadsheet, and you'd have a tabloid. And it's almost like the National is right in between those two. It's it's not going to the upper end of the market. It's not going to the lower end of the market. It's sort of somewhere in between the two.
They're kind of stymied. I mean, in fairness, I don't want to make this to be a rant about the National, because I don't have any qualms with them. We operate in different spheres. We're a magazine, and they're a daily. I would just say to you that I can only see what everybody sees is that there's a 49 front cover saying Independence tomorrow, or I'm paraphrasing, words to that effect, which is having a detrimental effect, I would think, on the criticism that they get. I mean, whether it's constructive or otherwise, there are people that say, this is just same old, same old. They're quite close to the current party, which is probably great for them for getting articles and stories. But one wonders whether, in fact, it's all about clicks, or whether they genuinely, I dare say there are, the editor, Callum, and the rest of them do believe in independence. It's just what they have to do to get their numbers up and out the door, and it's a difficult gig for them. I must confess, I don't envy their position, but
well, they come in for a lot of unfair criticism, I think, and it's probably similar to the unfair criticism that you get at iScot, which is
they're trying to be all things to all people as they are, but they've gone down the line that they affiliated, or they've been allowed to affiliate themselves with the SNP party. Right. So they seem to have that. That's a perception. Whether it's the reality, I doubt very much indeed if it is, but the perception is that they seem to be hand in glove with the SNP, which to me is not an ideal situation to be in for any publication, to be affiliated with any political party. But that's where we are. And it is the only newspaper that we have today that supports Scottish independence. So in fairness,
I mean, I'm not sure really they are affiliated to the SNP, because they one thing, in complete contrast to the Sunday Herald when it was edited by Neil Mackay, they do seem to cover all shades of opinion within the movement. They've got, at least they used to have Carol Leckie who used to be in the SSP, all the way through to Thatchite Right and Michael Fry. They've got people from Alapa. They've got George Caravan. I mean, I've written for them. Obviously, that was mainly before I was in Alapa, but I've written for them a couple of times since I joined Alapa. They've got people from the Greens. They have columnists from the Greens, so they cover the whole spectrum.
My apologies to the guys at National if you're watching this. I don't receive copies of National, and I don't get the National. But I wish them every. It sounds like an unfair rant I've got against them. I just think they've got a tough gig to try and sell papers, and they've got an equally tough gig when they're doing. But on the other hand, they've got a sister paper, the Herald, that as P&Ls goes, if as a finance director, I'd be delighted with the fact that they're doing well, and what they lose in the roundabouts to pick up at the swings, I would say. So more power to their elbow, and I wish them well. The affiliation to the SNP, they're a friendly paper to the SNP, I would say, and most of the front covers that are saying positive things about the referendum, they're obviously getting that direct from the SNP. We don't get any information from the SNP at all, and it's not a problem for us. We don't.
But I think, in fairness, they have made effort. I mean, people will argue about whether it's sufficient, but they have made efforts to have the Alapa view in there. They certainly have no problem with the Greens. The Greens get extensive coverage. Yeah, I think they do their level best. I suppose the problem is that if you're giving your fair share of coverage to the SNP, who are obviously a much bigger party than the other two pro-independence parties, then it's going to look like an attack on the other two, even if it's not intended.
As I said, I don't envy the editors. It's just going to be that's where they are. They're positioned themselves. They've nailed their colours to the mast, and that's where they're going. They support independence, and for those people that buy it, to answer the question of why they're not up their 40,000s or 50,000s. It's probably just down to content. It may well be that people will only buy stuff that they perceive as having value for what they're doing. And we're exactly the same. I mean, people only buy it if they think that we are worth. It's just because you have independence next to your name doesn't mean to say you're automatically going to get supported. As much as a lot of people who try to promote independence wish it would be, but you have to have something that's worth value that people want to pay for.
It's partly just habit as well. You know, the other papers have been around for so much longer, and people just. I mean, I saw a guy the other day walking out with a copy of the Express, and I just thought, what are you doing? Because he didn't look like an Express reader to me, but he's probably just been buying that paper for years.
The National as well. I mean, but I hear all the stories about folk, covering them up and everything else. We used to get that too. Our magazine would be put to the back of the shelf and everything else purely because it smacks of independence. It was really bad. So they have all that kind of stuff. Plus the fact that the demographic nowadays up to 55 is not to buy printed material, and it's expensive to do, and the wastage. I mean, there is a good 40% of what's printed probably is sold, and the rest of it, I'm talking in general terms, not specifically about the National.
Yeah.
But we used to go to Menzies and Linwood and see that they've got a huge big pulp, like a 40-foot container, which is really just taken in pulp stuff. And these are bundles of newspapers that haven't even been, put on a shelf, but still wrapped up that come back from the field. And the nature of the business is such that it's a hugely, hugely wasteful. But if you don't have your magazines or your newspapers out, they'll buy somebody else's. So they overprint in order that, there's always going to be copies there in case somebody runs short and buys somebody else's and decides that's going to be the next paper for the next time. So yeah, not a particularly great game, but digital is coming more and more to the fore. And it's a lot of cost savings in digital, that's for sure.
Just as a matter of interest, what has been the attitude, if any, of the traditional media to iScot? I've seen maybe occasionally the odd sneering comment from somebody.
We had one gentleman that Robbie and Woody actually took apart where he said that iScot should be one of these magazines that's known to the authorities. And he hadn't actually read it. He just believed that we were going to be some kind of, handcraft thing run off in a banding machine. You're probably too young to understand what a banding machine is, but and stapled together, that kind of thing with sticky on stuff. We've got a lot of professional people. I mean, our graphic artist at the beginning is Morris, the guy who was the lead graphic artist for the Herald and the Times, and we have a lot of background support. My background isn't in publications, but sales and marketing. But we have done it not listening to a lot of guys who were in the game, and probably would I do it again if I had my life to live over again? No, probably not. Now that I know now. I still would be for independence, but I maybe have done it differently. But the message has to get out. There are a lot of people that just don't know the merits of independence because we're cocooned in this cacophony of state media.
Yeah.
And we don't know any different. And really, there's nobody standing there with barbed wire outside our front doors with bayonets pointing at us that would make us think, my God, we need to do something. People need to educate themselves and understand exactly the reasons why Scotland was forced into this marriage of convenience. And it's for the benefit of down south. Of that, there's no doubt. And whilst we have friends and family in England, we think it's about time that we said, look, this isn't working for us. There's no argument at the beginning. There's no argument to continue. Let's shake hands and say goodbye.
Well, maybe just to finish this conversation on a more positive note, I think the impact of the Christmas party in Downing Street is really incredible. It's really changed the political weather, and the opinion polls across Britain have Labour in a quite a substantial lead for the first time in a very long time. And so it's changed the game. And my personal view is if there was a poll on independence right now, it would probably show a swing to yes. So, I mean, could this be like the moment where everything starts going our way again?
I think there always was, yes. I believe that the 2014 referendum just didn't click right. It just seemed the Dundee thing, the Glasgow. It just didn't seem right. But having spoken to a gentleman in Argyll and Bute regarding the records, I'm just going to say that it just didn't seem right. But I think that there's more people who are keen on the idea of Scotland being independent, who are not necessarily affiliated to political parties, but it just feels right. It's the right thing to be and the right thing to do. I mean, the kind of environment that we're involved in just now, the union of non-equals is rare, if anything. Independence is normal. Independence in all walks of life is particularly normal. Why this particular union should be dominated by one individual isn't normal. The fact that I believe that the idea of federalism would never work within the United Kingdom is because we have a class system that's formed by the elite and the privileged. And as I always say, that if you're elite and you're privileged, the idea of federalism seems like oppression, that suddenly you've lost that elite and privileged position because you have to be the same as everybody else, and therefore it's not going to work. So you will never find English legislators agreeing to a federal system in the United Kingdom because it loses their power. It's a loss of power. They are privileged. They can do what they like. They have the ability to say no. You can't have an independence referendum because we say so in a union of equals, which why nobody questions that I really don't know. And I think as soon as that changes, the better it will be for Scotland. We seem to be asking permission rather than making decisions on the basis of we'll decide what we're going to do rather than is it okay if you give us a section 30? To me, it's just nonsense, complete and utter nonsense.
Okay, thanks very much for your time today, Ken. I really appreciate it. And live from the opulent, enormous offices of iScot there behind you.
And to my friends with the National, we love you. We honestly love you.
We do love the National.
Yeah.
If we need the National, we desperately need the National to continue.
Yeah, I know.
And to thrive. So we hope they do.
We do. So buy them.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And that was episode 14 of the Scot Goes Popcast. So until next time, keep checking the Scot Goes Pop blog for all the latest Scottish polling news and political commentary. Bye for now.